Okay. We're starting over, right? Okay. There was once a man who inherited a large generator, which was running when he got it, and which he couldn't seem to turn off. So he learned to live with it, and in fact came to think of its operation as beneficial. There is a most ancient legend, no longer repeated in polite company, which says that the first men who discovered the secret were the ones who gave it the name of the secret, because what it reveals is far too simple to ever be successfully approached otherwise. There is another equally obscure story that says those first discoverers of the secret also established a museum that exists still today, in which is kept a living history and artifacts of the discovery. The mother paradigm of all human minds gazed out across the planet of her offsprings and said, "What they continue to call thinking makes me kind of ashamed." Local follow-up to previous story. The born lame, feeling guilty for their condition, is a four-dimensional version of a greater reality. The magic of the view from the mental porch is that as soon as you're old enough to recognize traffic, there is traffic. A man who for some time had been struggling with the secret one day concluded, "If I could just determine which is the more important to my existence as a human being, my body or my mind, I feel sure it would bring me closer to unraveling the mystery." Such questions can appear valid, but why does no one notice that given the two possibilities involved, body and mind, they always arise from the same source? Men continue to appreciate the proverbial truth that it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, while never sensing any pertinent significance to those baffling, insoluble questions that dog his soul. Soul in quotation marks. And as they danced away into the expanding sunrise, the mystical Rockettes seemed to be singing, "Let me hear my something talk, something talk." It was impossible to be certain that this was what they were saying, but for sure it was neither "let me hear my body talk" or "mind talk." Today's transcendental fairy tale. Once upon a time, in a tiny kingdom, the townspeople gathered in the village square around a speaker who addressed them thusly. "There is a wisdom within man, of which he knows not." And someone asked, "Then of what good is it?" And the speaker replied, "Hey, give me a break here." Just as the mean old wolf leaped from behind a billboard and ate everyone up. There are some who claim that after wiping his mouth and licking his teeth as he left, the wolf was heard singing, "Now, let me hear no nothing talk, nothing talk." Those who repeat the cliche, "what goes around comes around," and who find therein the ideas of completion, conclusion, and resolution represented, display themselves the fact that, intellectually speaking, they have not sufficiently been around. Never shoot the last horse left on a merry-go-round, unless you know what you're doing. The continuing intrigue of the view from the porch is that one's own mental preferences regarding the passing traffic are necessary to keep its flow constant. A man wrote the mystic doctor and asked, "Can just thinking about discovering the secret help make up for not doing it?" And the doctor replied, "Hey, come on, you know that. Thinking about anything can make up for not doing it. Just look at most men's lives." Talk. One father told his son, "As regards this common human activity, the only thing you need to remember is that no one fully understands what they're talking about." It's not their fault. They're not supposed to. It's just the nature of speech. Over and out, 10-4, hit the road, I'm out of here, how about you? In his daily address, the head monk said to the neophytes, until a man despises sleep, he understands nothing. And one of the youngers raised his hand. You mean sleep metaphorically? To which the elder replied, did anyone hear me say metaphorically? There was once a man who kept a wild animal as best he could for a pet. And the less attention he gave to it, the wilder it was. He gave it the name of... One man had a babbling brook in his backyard. He brought it inside. He lived to regret it. Those who take life serious make life serious. And life told one man, well, if you persist in what you're doing, don't come crawling back on your knees to me. And the man replied, where the hell do you think I've been living up till now? Having spent a lifetime on the dance floor with that secret partner, one man finally asked, what is the name of that song anyway? One man could make up cute stories, and life said to him, why don't you become a mystic? And the guy said, are you serious? And life replied, sure. The sounds of traffic you hear in your head are in large part the sounds of your own preferences. There are two kinds of blood that feed the brain. Yet another singular facet of the mystical quest is that it is the only human activity that can be done strictly by oneself, yet which requires the directions of someone other than oneself to start. Yes, I know that such seems to be so in other affairs of man. But once you realize the fact that life itself is alive, and that everyone is thus everyone else's grandfather and everyone else's granddaughter, you're aware that none instructeth themselves save the independent warrior. There's a story that says every time someone who knows the secret attempts to put something down about it in writing, that no matter what name they place on it, by the time it reaches the level of normal earth eyes, its title has been translated to the Book of Contradictions, Non Sequiturs, and Other Impossibilities. If you doubt this, just go back and reread the above. To try and keep his attention diverted, life said to one man, look, I'm as sick about it as you are. I don't think we'll even surmise as to whether it works or not. There are limits to the mind, but none to what it can think about. A dangerous situation, if you ever want to get anywhere. The alleged stepson of a rumored mystic once purportedly claimed, as a joke, that you can spot a man who knows the secret by the fact that he doesn't much give a shit about anything, but that you're not supposed to notice. The son of a prominent city family of doctors, philosophers, scientists, and priests makes the assertion that those seeking to expand and control their own consciousness are simply people making it unnecessarily more difficult for themselves. The son of a local mortician says, screw everybody else's interest, that he and his family will have the last word regardless. No. Friends, do we have a man here with his finger on the primary pulse of life, or what? One man began to strongly feel that his intellect was closer to closing in on matters not limited entirely to its domain when he, who lived alone, began to find pubic hairs in the typewriter on which his mystical works were produced. You can chase down a thief, chase down a rumor, chase down a cause, even a disease. But there's one culprit the mind will never catch. Call me a cop, call me a priest, call me anybody but a man who thinks like I do. Help, help, help is on the way. Well, not really on the way, but available. If you'd ever shut up. But I didn't say anything. Well, I didn't mean to me. In worlds like ours, things in balance are things in hiding. And now this safety reminder. In worlds like ours, things out of balance are things in hiding. And now this safety reminder. Open up your eyes and wise up. All vehicles and passing traffic are coated with a layer of potential glue, which is only activated in the presence of your preferences. The man who won the physique contest attributed his victory to the great genes I inherited from my parents and my own hard work. And to think, not a reporter in sight to ask him how he came to be motivated to work so hard. At an earlier time, life once thought of man within itself as a transient electrochemical anomaly, but soon corrected itself, not man, but man's thinking. The less men understand what they're talking about, the more they're inclined to use modifiers. M-O-T, never mind. A man asked a mystic, why do you sometimes stand and sometimes sit, sometimes speak and are sometimes silent? And the mysterious one replied, because something other than me makes me do it. And do note that therein I play out the roles of both ordinary men and mystics. They're not the same, you see. It's all in the wrist. While those about him sought the guide's help in matters of love, success, and finance, one man asked only that they put up some kind of roadblocks to halt the traffic passing his porch. A high view of thinking. There could be no snakes in the bushes if you didn't provide the bushes. And one man said, I prefer alligators myself. Well, there you are. Then there's this one guy who had this kind of, well, little approach to the question, which he explains like this. If you can't verbally figure it out to your satisfaction, then you still haven't found the right path to walk. If you can't verbally figure it out, if you can't verbally figure it out to your satisfaction, ellipsis. All talk about the secret sounds both strange, yet somehow familiar. Life told one guy, here, try this on. One size fits all. You figure he was referring to the mind? A man wrote to the doctor and said, Dear Doc, is life masculine or feminine? And the doctor replied, ask your father. She'll know. And the man thought, boy, I'm glad I didn't ask if it is a masochist or a sadist. On one world, an increase in understanding is often accompanied by bouts of tetanus. To those with the mystical itch, being an ordinarily mental creature is like being a prisoner without a cell, like being continually shot but never wounded, like being forever on the lookout but apparently in the wrong spot to see, and like being in the middle of everything yet always alone. And it's like being the world's biggest crybaby. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that. In addition to this probably having made you smile, ask yourself this. Why? When this is actually the only strictly human activity that is not whine productive. A lad asked his father, "Why do humans find it so strange that animals don't cry?" And the larger one replied, "But it's only normal humans who do." And beyond the instant case, the kid suddenly realized that every question regarding why men don't or can't see what's obvious has the same answer, though they're not primed, though one they're not primed to expect or can readily hear. Never tripped the last pachyderm in a parade of elephants marching trunk to tail, trunk to tail, trunk to tail. At any spot between here and the actual experience, there are several ways to pertinently pass the time. You can read what others think about it. You can listen to what others have to say about it. You can write about it. You can talk about it. And you can think about it. At any place between here and the experience, there are ways to pass the time. Some better for some, others better for others. The mayor told the townsfolk, "The great thing about having preferences is that you're always frightened." And lo, they were sorely grateful to have such leadership. Right there, in their midst. And we're talking really in their midst. Every mother's son of them. A man with nothing to lose mentally is not dangerous, except to his own thinking. If there was an extended dimensional reality, that is a real reality at this level, to prayer, then to what could a more conscious man direct his, knowing it all to go through the mind? A recent visitor to our planet said that his biggest laugh here came not from whoopee cushions or serious political speeches, but from hearing the term "lose your mind." Yeah. Far beyond all metaphors of Shangri-La, Istanbul, and paradise is the experience possible in one's own head that renders all exotic travels pale by comparison. A more conscious man in some ways is like the original stay-at-homer, but with a few added twists and perks. Men explore new lands and travel to outer space, not to make physical discoveries, but to get away from home. Some positive-based news if you're able to hear it. Those who follow an established, consistent mystical path eventually die on the vine. What men discover upon the demise of their mind after it's too late is that preferences are what killed it. What better synonym then for a routine existence than too late? Always too late. And one man decided, as long as up's near down, true's next to false, and 3 leads to 4, I ain't coming back home. Men who measure progress by things you can see are only partial men. Today's fairy tale update. Mystics who, in their travels through the forbidden forest, leave a trail of personal breadcrumbs made a mistake. Between Paris and Istanbul is an infrastructure connection unknown to ordinary men. Likewise, such between the stomach and the mind, between life and man. The simple all end up eventually playing in each other's backyard. There are different types of breath men take. Breath that feeds the body, that feeds emotions, and that feeds the mind. As relates specifically to the consciousness of those who seek for more, diffusion equals distortion. To an expanded consciousness, the distance between metaphor and reality is the same distance as between not knowing anything and knowing something. With the expanded observational equipment available to mystical scientists, it can be seen that the expanses within the human brain are much greater than generally believed. To expanded hearing, all attempts to describe what's actually going on in life are bullshit and lackluster at that. Yeah. Expanded awareness accepts bullshit as an integral part of being a mystic in a barnyard. Fiction, what local conditions think of when they think of man. There was once a planet of symbolism that became too literal and exploded all to hell. At a simple level, even simple people know one secret of life, which is simply to live. Are you so sure that the secret is far different? Although any wild animal would be more easily nourished in a zoo, none seek out such confinement. A shame men's thinking isn't as insightful. As you know, several weeks back, we started a new series of me bringing up examples from everyday life, wherein our good friend and provider Life lays out very blatant hints regarding the secret right out in the open. A few minutes before we began taping tonight, however, I was notified by Life that, in fact, had the tenor of a near threat that I should cease this. Life said that it was afraid some people might actually end up seeing something. So, anyway, we'll work around it. So since it did put something of a crimp in my planned program for tonight, I thought perhaps we would take this opportunity for a sort of a time out, and perhaps I could try to be a little more plain and blunt in certain areas. Of late, I have used the term the secret, referring basically, if you can make sense out of the way, verb or phrases, verbal action phrases, and proper nouns seem to get mangled in circumstances such as this. I assume that it's obvious that I'm referring to this kind of activity. I cannot say whether I invented that term to call this the secret. I don't know, and it's of no importance. I don't recall anybody doing it, although it is very long in tooth for people to refer to there being a secret, the secret of life. And you have throughout all the religions fairy tales, myths, the claim, the belief, the assumption that there is a secret to life. And that if you read it in a certain way, sometimes with more effort and less effort than others, much of the literature having to do with illumination, with great mystical or spiritual experiences, those who write about it, those who claim to have participated in it, in some way or the other will infer or state that by such an experience they understood, it was revealed to them the secret of life. But just to call this the secret sounds like a noun when it's obviously some sort of activity, or else between all of us we have misused the English language to such a degree that it's no longer important and no one even notices anymore. If we're lucky. No. I was going to threaten to be a little more specific because I've had people now recognize me here on the street and go, "Oh, you're the guy who was talking about the secret. What is the secret?" Which I can't really get upset because, I guess I asked for it. But now I just have strangers say, "Oh, you're the guy I see on TV. You're the one talking about the secret." And I go, "Well, yeah." And they go, "What is it?" I'm going to get even with who for telling me to stop that series. And my threat to be a little more blunt for a time out tonight. I was going to give a little, point out to you the origins and the purpose of not only my use of the term "the secret" and other people's version of it in a different sense, but also the most commonly and the most ancient method used and still being used in the attempted pursuit of the secret. Now, one thing to remind you, when I say the secret, it is, to quote myself, that it is not so much something you know as it is an experience. I can be blunter than that. We can take out of my own quote, take out the parts about it's not so much as it is. Yeah. But if you say it otherwise, I can put it down, if you took that sentence apart, if you can recall what the original was, that the secret is not so much something to know as it is something that's experienced. Now, if you take out all the apparent hems and haws and cautions, and the sentence would break down to just the secret is not something you know, it's something you experience. That is almost too verbally self-conclusive that even if someone, for whatever reason, if someone heard that and went, I like that. By God, I've been thinking along similar lines, or they were just impressed with my charm and charisma. And I said it, and they go, "Well, I like it." That doesn't do any good, because it is an experience, but I want to be a little more specific. You have history full of people who have apparently had the experience, people who claim to, and it's assumed they did. It is within the mainstream of religion. All of the great prophets, they're considered either supernatural or demigods, that at some point in their life they underwent some transformation. That if they were indeed semi-divine nature, it took some sort of transformation, some sort of illumination, some experience had to happen while they were here on this mortal plane for it to come to their attention, or for it to reach its full fruition. And I'm just taking that as a beginning point. That is commonly accepted. If we just take the major religions that covers, in the high 90% of all the human population. Now, if we just take Islam and Buddhism and Christianity and Judaism, and all of them, looking at them all as having a founder, Judaism being a little less specific, but in the midst of all of them, if we just say Moses. But in all cases, if we use Moses, Jesus, and Buddha, and Muhammad, then all of them, even in some cases now, Christians, of course, in the mainstream, consider that Jesus was actually a demigod or a god. But in any case, even their own stories say that here they are, ended up of human parents, they ended up in a human form. And so even taking the most extreme example, that is of believing that Jesus and all the other minor religions and cults, but of taking Jesus to be of actually divine origin, he still, by their own stories, he had to go through all kinds of trials and tribulations, go out and fast and stay off on his own, and he had to wrestle with his own demons. And then it took, a transformation had to happen to him, either for him to realize his divinity, or for it to reach its full blossom so that he could operate as a god, or as a semi-god. And all the other cases, that Moses going up, seeing the face of God, and God actually talking to him, telling him what's what, explaining the nature of life and what was expected of him. That he came down from the mountain, not the Moses who went up. And of course Muhammad, was just common everyday camel merchant, used to wander off by himself and acted a little strange, but he was successful. He was an ordinary member of the community, and then he kept wandering off to this cave. One day he came back, and everybody understood. They just realized, or at least when he started talking, that something had happened. And of course Buddha, there he sat under the tree until it finally went wham. And when he stood up, he was the Buddha. He was not the person who sat down under the tree. When he got up, he was the enlightened one. All of these state, and it's accepted by the human mind just because of the way it works, even in areas outside that apparently is metaphysical or extraordinary. But it's accepted that they underwent a transformation that happened, that went whammo, and that was it. I'm going ahead and tell you that that's not the way it works. And all I can do is begin now to sketch around it, because there is no way to. That's not true. I was going to say there's no way to directly say what I was going to say. I can directly say it, but it wouldn't mean anything. The experience is not like the discovery of information. But now I said I was going to tie this, and let me jump back and forth to the most ancient and still most commonly used form of people attempting to have this experience. And to put it into one word, one English word, would be remembrance. And as far back as you find, and very, perhaps most common in most religions, it is hidden within the idea of prayer. But there are sufficient references right out in the open in other languages, but that the term translates in all forms of pre-Confucius thought and philosophy in the Far East, in the Vedic literature. There are plenty of references in early, less mainstream forms of Buddhism, just direct terms, direct references that the whole experience, the whole method that they were using was one of remembrance, which is always, it starts out very simple, direct, but once it falls into the common hopper, the public marketplace, it becomes, as it must, it becomes convoluted and complex. And the idea of remembrance fell into such tenuously connected things to be charitable as ancestor worship. That is, to remember the past, to remember one's ancestors, that it was in some way sacred duty, and it could have a sacred and supernatural payoff. That were you faithful to your deceased ancestors, if you did try and remember your ancestors, that the gods very likely would reward you. The remembrance, when I said it's still used, the most common form. Right now it's in the West, it has undergone a certain kind of, in the last 30 or 40 years, it's undergone a kind of revised, there's become a kind of revised interest. Not a kind of, there's become revised interest. And the English language is now referred to as remembering oneself. And other times, in other places, even contemporaneous to us in the West, right now, in other places, it's still going by names such as the remembrance of God, the remembrance of breath, the remembrance of life. But let's take the remembrance of self, remembering oneself. It can be described that apparently the easiest definition, or the way they all seem to, or the way they all do approach it, is that you must become, to remember yourself is you become aware that you are here, regardless of what else is going on. That you have a constant awareness that no matter what else you are doing, what else you're thinking, what you're saying, what activities you're involved with, you simply hold this constant knowledge that I exist, that I remember that I am here. In addition to whatever I'm doing, what I'm gesturing, I might be saying, and at the same time I might be saying to someone, boy, it's glad to see you, while I'm aware of the fact that I'm remembering you still owe me $10 from 35 years ago. To just be aware of it. To remember that I'm here and I'm doing one thing, but I'm internally, I could be something else. I could be someplace else. but I am here. Ordinary people can never do this. There is no way just through ordinary methods, just by continually attempting that it will result in anything resembling the aim that they proclaim it to pursue. But let me also point out, I am certainly not attacking the method, because it is as good as any, and it is the oldest. And I'm going to tell you why it's the oldest. But without the addition of remembering oneself. It was remembrance. Now here it is. It's plain and it's simple, but it'll go by so fast. The very first people that had the experience is a totally, even though I say that the experience, when I made this gesture about the Buddhas and them, and that experience where Buddha went, it is described as instantaneous. It is described as being a line of debarkation, a line of departure from a person's old self. They refer to it as transformation. They refer to it as the regeneration of man. Or in Christianity and many others, the rebirth, that you become another person, a new person. And it happens like that. There is validity to that, because for the benefit of those who have not actually had the experience, the experience is absolutely, it changes everything about your state of consciousness while you're still aware of your normal state. It does not throw one into a fit, does not throw one into a confused state, does not render one catatonic. Although I know that there are also plenty of stories around that when people have mystical experience, or when people in some way are participants in the divine union with God, people who've been praying and fasting, that it's very common that they have descriptions. It's accepted in some religions that if someone reaches that plateau, it is not unusual for them to pass out. Of course, I've also pointed out that there have been plenty of also critics of life, of that kind of activity in life, who say, hey, those descriptions, they fit epileptic fits. They fit, no, I'm not being funny. There are people who actually point that out. The experience itself, in no wise, is a component or is a motivator of unconsciousness or dazed conditions or fits or in any way passing out. If I may be so bold as to say, contraire. And I was, and I did. The experience, and remember, before I get there, so that you don't get tripped up, there is not the experience. But the first time, the experience is absolutely the first person who ever did it, and very likely, I know I've made up stories of late, of little tales and saying new versions or unknown tellings of the creation myth, at least our Western version, and me saying all sorts of things that Adam did as soon as he left the garden, or within a few years, or what Adam's children did, or what his grandchildren did. I assure you it was shortly after man began to think. It wasn't that long. Somewhere between shortly and wasn't that long. I'll leave it to you leave it to you historians and you mathematicians to figure out. I'm not sure, but somewhere in there, I feel confident that a man's brain somewhere had this experience. Notice I said the man's brain. Had this experience. There he was, conscious, not the least bit less conscious than he was. No fit, no visions, no talking to gods, no talking to spirits. Nothing unusual except this. His brain was in a totally different state. Now I have to say that was totally different, but you are still aware of your ordinary state. You're aware of the distinction between the state and your ordinary state. Of course, as I oftentimes like to point out, enjoying liking things as much as the next man, you're also immediately aware of why nobody can tell you what it is. Because you're aware of it. You're aware that you still have the full awareness of your ordinary state. But you are now in a conscious condition that is absolutely unlike your normal state. They're going on simultaneously, and there you are, and you immediately, it's just a side thing, but you immediately go, You understand now why nobody could tell you what it was. Because you understand, well, I couldn't tell anybody either. Except it's as plain as looking at your hand. I'm just trying to give it to you. I mean, it's not obvious. You're right here, and you still got your same condition right there that you can see. You know, it's right there. And you are in truly an absolutely different state of consciousness. Absolutely different. I'm not going to stoop to using modifiers just to impress you. Absolutely different. I don't consider that phrase to contain modifiers. It's just totally different. Not a little different, it's totally different. Except you understand it already breaks down if you take my description as valid, because you are still conscious of the way you're normally conscious. So it's still there. So for me to say that it's totally different can't be true. But it is. You are like a new person. It's like now there are two people in you, and one of them is now conscious in a way that the old person was not, except the old person's still there. But now you feel as though you are the new person. You don't feel like the old person, that there's some intruder. When that happens, and people describe that, what are they describing? They're saying, hello, I'm nuts. That's the way it's accepted. That when you identify, when you feel that your position in personality is the old one, which also I wasn't getting into this, but you might understand, if you heard that, which evidently some of you did, is also the origins of the many stories of people believing that God's talked to them. Which there are people out in life who say, hey, people who say that God's talking to them, there's not much difference between that and nutso people. Of course, all that's based upon is everything else out in the ordinary world is who's in charge, who's in the majority. If there's a man dressed up with a large church and a good car and a good following, and he says God talks to him, that'll fly. I mean, he may have the mayor of the city come over several times a year to be photographed with him. Good votes. But if you've got a guy living out on the street in a cardboard box and he says God talks to him, and he says it's the same God, and they both claim to be Christians, they'll put that man away. Not think a thing about it. Oh, he ain't talking. God's not talking to him. He's crazy. But here's a guy, congregation of several thousand people, can deliver votes, nice salary. I mean, he's somebody in the community, and he says it periodically that he seeks it. And he admits, in all humility, that he probably doesn't deserve it, and that he prays and he fasts several times a year, but it's only a few times in life that he distinctly heard God speak. And people go, ooh. He said, oh, there's no doubt about it. It was God. And nobody says a word. They don't lock him up. I'll leave that to you. Of course, you're supposed to be good enough by now to understand that any possible use of that does not have to do with ministers out in the physical world with large flocks as opposed to homeless individuals on the street. It's up here. There are parts of your mind that can think things that seem to be absolutely out of the mainstream, and parts of them you'll accept. And then parts of them will come along and you go, oh, no. I am skating on thin ice. I'm listening to some homeless person on the street talking to me now. But suddenly you hear the voice of your father's, your ancestors' religion, or you hear the voice of society in general. And that can tell you something a little out of the mainstream, but as long as it's considered to be sane and part of mainstream, that's all right. But back to, the experience is absolutely astounding, or else people would not still be involved with it. It just is. But when I said there's not one experience, here it goes. That first experience is by no means the end of it, and it is not the experience. I can call it the experience, but it's the first time you had a piece of the experience. It does not last. Nobody stays in that condition. It then becomes a matter of its back and forth, up and down. Those who have it, as soon as they have it, first time they have it, they go, that's it. At least I have not wasted my life. But the first person that had it, he just had it, let's say. Since there was if we were actually going to talk about the first man who ever had the experience. He's already been conscious for some length of time, if you want to say Adam. He'd already been a while, been through all the kinds of things that humans are through, and then had this experience. That there he is, he's still Adam, and yet he is somebody completely different, simultaneously with it. And you go, as far as consciousness goes the way I normally am, forget it. I'll take this. I mean, it's not even something you think about. It's just, wow. In fact, the first guy, if you want me to play around a little bit, it's of no great importance, he probably thought, well, wait, this is what I've been working for. I just hadn't grown up yet. There he was, 30 or 40 years old, but he had none of the basis on it. If he was the first guy, he just thought, well, this is natural progression. I knew that something had been bothering me, but now I see what it is. My brain just wasn't completely developed. And he thought, this is it. Because it did seem to be it. Now, there are no more of the questions, there are no more of the annoyances, there's no more of what everyone has as the questions that dog men's soul, everything that has annoyed and disturbed a man's mind, that had disturbed Adam's mind up till then, was answered. I'm saying answered in the broadest connotation of the word. All of his doubts, everything that seemed to be lacking, all the questions that he wanted answered, all the things that he couldn't even put into words that seemed to disturb him, all the mental agitation, all the noise of traffic ceased just like that. It was still there. He knew it was there. But it all went away. Everything was answered. He knew the secret. All right? It went away. Now, what would you do if what would you do if you were then going to try to think about yourself, because you got to? It was a thinking, it seemed to be seated in thinking to start with somewhere. What would you think about? You talking to yourself. Or if it makes it easier, he turns around to Eve or his son by then, or whoever, and he tries to tell them about the state. And they go, that's what I want. He goes, well, me too. And they say, well, how will we get it? How'd you get there? Well, he doesn't know. Now follow this, because everybody repeats it. I'm just trying to help you a little bit. You still got to do it, but I'm trying to help because you actually repeat this, that it happens. We could say that you have a certain kind of background already, that if it happens, you would not be like me making up this picture of Adam or the first man that just happened to, because he was not striving for something. It just happened. And he thought, well, this is it. This is the natural progression. This is what I was headed for. I just didn't know it. I just upset all these years, but I should have known that, God was looking after me, or life was. I matured. Consciousness ripened. Then it's gone. And I can assure you that after that, you're absolutely hooked. If you think you've ever been addicted, there's just no choice. Once you've had that experience, that too is too dogmatic. It sounded impressive, but there are people who've had one experience and never had another, and that really went ahead and just didn't. Well, they tried a few more times, smoked a little dope, did a little something, and I thought, screw it. They just didn't have the energy for it. They didn't have that much interest. But for those that are wired up for this, that one experience is the end of all questions, all doubts, etc. There's no longer any real question in your life save this one. How in the goddamn hell do I get that back? And there doesn't seem to be. You don't even know how you got it really in the first place. Now, I know if you've been involved with something, if you're involved with some religious system or some spiritual discipline, all you can do is attribute it to the discipline. But you've got to attribute it to it and then look away real fast and not think about it. Because you had been doing whatever it was, praying and fasting or whatever it might have been, for 30 years before it happened. And it happened for a day and a half and then was gone. Then you look around at some of the people that you always thought were better than you were, that were more intelligent than you were, people who had been there longer than you were. And after you had it, you mentioned them, you went over to, or even while you were in that condition, while you had the experience, you went around to them and you went, huh? And you punched them. They go, what? And you thought, oh my God. Well, you normally you do it a little bit more, you go, huh? They go, you been drinking? And you think, oh shit. And that could have been the head of the monastery. At any rate, what I want you to get is this picture, that you have had this experience, and so there's no longer any doubt, there's nothing to discuss, there's nothing to ask about, there's no more theorizing about what it is, what it does, how good it is. You only got one question, how can I get it back? No. If, all these ifs, if you're wired up, if you're lucky, if the humidity is just right, if you got the right number of, if your name works out to the right numerological thing, and if you're on your Pisces on a pot or something. If you're just right, and you insist, I'm going to continue this, what one method? I mean, you don't know how you got there, even though if you had some discipline, if you're sharp enough, you realize there is no direct. You can see it yourself, it's not theory. You cannot see a direct correlation between what you were doing and this. What would? But I was taking you back because I promised to give you the origins and the purpose of the one greatest method, the most common method. I don't mean greatest, but the most commonly used method, that is remembrance. How did it come about? There is Adam, had the experience, and he wants it back. Got no method, does not know how it came upon him, doesn't know whether he did anything to bring it on. It just seemed natural until it went away. What can he do? Think about it. Now I can drag this out a little bit and say, well, he tried several things like a ball player. He went back and thought, all right, when I had it, which socks did I have on? Which underwear was I wearing? I'll get it. You can make up shit like that. But let me put it to you directly, save you time. What's the one thing that he could do? What's the one thing anyone who had the experience, and we've got to give him some credit of being fairly sharp, at any rate, he thinks about it a while. What can I do? He doesn't really know where to start. There's one thing and one thing only that he can rely on and can use. And that is, that's why I'm telling you, this is the beginning. This is the first so-called mystical system, and it's still the most commonly used. He would come to this kind of conclusion. Well, I'm not sure what to do. I know I want it back. I'll do whatever it takes. Within reason, to further notice, I'll do whatever it takes. I want it back. This is the way you're supposed to be conscious. This is being a complete man. I want it back. I don't know how to get it back. What can I do? And after he thought of wearing the same shirt and this and that, there's only one thing he knows for sure he can do, and that's try and remember that he had the experience. To try and remember that it happened, and try and remember, although he cannot, just through the sake of memory, he cannot revive, he cannot have the same experience, but he can sure as hell remember it happened, because every time he remembers it happened, it's that kind of, there's nothing to compare, but I'll make a simple shot. It has that kind of emotional depth to it that you can, just an ordinary person that was close to a mother or father or someone, that you can just think of the person and cry. I mean, all you got to do is say your mother's name or your father's name or someone you used to love. And you can just say their name or just think it to yourself. And if you don't turn away, you'll actually cry. It has that kind of immediate effect. That's not a perfect, but I'm trying to give you some translation of it, some comparison. It was so strong in Adam, the first man who had it, was so strong that the one thing he could depend upon was to try and remember it, because every time he actually remembered it with that kind of emotion that it can't bring on the experience, because just remember your dead parents and the kind of emotion it brings on will not bring them back to life. And just because you can imagine them, and just because you picture their final days and the final minutes, them smiling at you and saying they love you or whatever, and you cry, it won't bring it back. Him remembering the state would not bring the state back, but that was the only method he had, was I will not forget that. That this is it, this is my life. And the phone, what was that? And he realized the damn phone could ring. Or Eve could holler, hey, did you forget the bread? And he went, goddamn. That's nothing though, because then he goes, wait a minute, double goddamn. I was just thinking I'd never forget that state of consciousness, and I just did, over a lousy loaf of bread. If you're following this, which you don't have but a couple more minutes tonight, it was the one thing upon which he could depend. I don't mean it was instant enlightenment again, and it did not instantly bring it back, but think about it a second. I'll be silent several seconds, or 15 or 20. What else, put yourself in that position, what else could he do that he knew for a fact would contribute to it? The one thing that he knew for certain, it would have been like he'd been in a whole new place, a whole new country, a whole new universe. He can't talk to anybody. He don't know how he got there. It just happened. And he wants back at all costs. He wants back What's the one thing? He doesn't know how he got there. He doesn't know why he came back. It just happened. What's the one thing? The one thing out of all this experience, as I described, that he can depend on. One thing he knows for sure. One thing that has got to, and by itself, there's nothing else that he knows for sure. But this thing by itself, he can feel it, has the possibility of contributing to him returning. Don't forget that I was there. Because just thinking about it, he can almost, not bring it on, but it has an effect on him. The same way as, and at a lesser degree, as I said, that the recollection of the death of a loved one can make a man, actually cry, make his body, he can feel it, just the memory of it. Different level. But his remembrance of the state, of the condition, of the experience was the only thing. The only thing. Think about it. Okay. As always, I was right. It was the only thing that he could absolutely depend upon out of the experience. Because the experience is gone. You did not bring back physical artifacts. That's for people that's been on UFOs. Physically. Well, they did give me something to prove to you people I was there, but they told me not to show you. I left it home. I left it in the pickup. It was the remembrance, is what I'm saying, is the key. That all of these other systems. But now consider what it's gotten down to once it's into the public marketplace. It does not become just that. And there's several reasons. The main reason is those who pursue it to the point that they die on the vine. Those who pursue it as a continual system. They can never do it. It can be used to make those born lame feel guilty about it. And I don't mean being used by others as a conspiracy. Use it on yourself. Well, I'm not getting anywhere, but at least I feel bad about it. And every time you go to see your spiritual leader or someone, they go say, well, have you remembered yourself constantly? And unless they're as stupid as their followers, they know the answer is no. I shouldn't have said that. That's a whole nother... Well, when I say I shouldn't have said that, we don't have time to go into it. But anyone who says, well, wait a minute, are you remembering yourself constantly? Anybody ever ask you that? Do I have to tell you? Pick up your mystical clothing, what tattered remains you have, and leave, if they ask you that. But at any rate, the point is, it's not that they are pulling a conspiracy on you, but you use it on yourself. It's like, well, sure, I'm not getting anywhere. I don't feel any more enlightened. I don't feel that I'm any more awakened than I was before. But God, I feel horrible about it because I'm not doing the method that's supposed to lead to it. So, I mean, what can I expect? It gets into that, like I said, all the way from that to such obscurities as the attempt to remember one's dead ancestors, not just for the sake of the love that you felt for them, but because it has some sacred possible duty to it. It is one thing. I'm telling you how simple it started and how simple it actually is. But here's the simple origins of it. Is the first man who had the experience and then it went away, which it does. Now let's pick it up next time unless life lets me do something else. That the one method, the one thing that he could know for sure once he went back to his normal state, once he lost the experience, that the experience itself, not the experience itself is gone. But the one thing that he knows for sure, the one thing that he can retrieve from it, the one thing that he can still hold to out of the experience which is no longer extant, is the memory of it. Not the memory of the experience, but the memory that it happened. And so, what piece of armor did this fresh, almost skint bear, barely in diapers warrior have after this first experience? What shield, what equipment did he have? One thing, the memory that it happened. That all get on?